I want to welcome everyone this afternoon to another edition of Public Leadership Institute's online training, our policy leadership training series that we bring to you on a bi-monthly frequency. Today's session, we're going to be talking about the best ways to communicate your message with direct mail. For frequent attendees of these trainings, we spend a lot of time talking around about best ways to communicate our values in a way to not only persuade, but to activate supporters into a level of action. And today we're going to talk about some of the tangible and concrete ways to transition the messaging piece into tools and techniques to communicate with voters, communicate with supporters, communicate with a target audience. My name is Dave Woodward. I'm going to be your host today as Public Leadership Institute's National Network Director. I'm also a county commissioner based in Michigan and a former state legislator, and will be facilitating today's session. A little bit of housekeeping first. For those, we have a few folks who are new and haven't joined us before. I want to give a little bit of background on Public Leadership Institute. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, a leadership organization that's really focused on building public awareness around key issues of equity and justice, and working with developing the leadership of elected officials and other public leaders to improve the economic and social conditions for all people. And you can get a lot of information at www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. If you go to the website, there's going to be a host of publications that we have produced. The Progressive Agenda, Voice in Our Values, which is a messaging guide for candidates and elected officials. And one of our more recent publications, A Playbook for Abortion Rights, a guide for state and local policymakers. Wealth of information that's always being enhanced, and so I encourage you to go to them. You can download these publications for free, and you can also, some of these publications like Voice in Our Values, you can go online and purchase. Speaking of Voice in Our Values, we're going to be talking a lot of the content that's captured there. We're going to be really talking about transitioning that into direct mail as a medium for communicating with our target audiences. Before I introduce our presenter this afternoon, I just want to point out a couple of tools on your control panel. We really want these sessions to be as value added as possible for each of you who are taking time to join us. And I realize that people join us from a variety of locations, and we've got a number of ways to make sure that your thoughts, comments, reaction, etc. Can be included. On your control panel, you should see a little hand icon. If you have audio capability, you can click on that at any time, and we'll pause frequently for questions or comments, reaction to the things being talked about, or create the space to have your individual concerns addressed. Click on that to let us know, and we'll put you in the queue, and when we pause for questions, we'll make sure we give you the mic and you can ask your questions. And because people join us from a variety of locations, we also have the ability to type questions in if audio is not available with you at the moment. So you can type questions in the question bar. We'll also take those questions as they come. My email, dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org, is on the screen. If you have any questions over the course of the presentation, feel free to email me, and I will try to address those as well, even after the presentation. We will be recording the session, and it will be up on a link to our website, so you don't need to take a lot of copious notes. You'll be able to go back and get this, really take the opportunity to actively engage in today's session. Without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Bernie Horn. Bernie Horn is the Senior Advisor for Public Leadership Institute, former policy director, communication trainer, author of a lot of the publications that I outlined. We are so fortunate to have this progressive champion part of our team, and is going to really talk about all his expertise in the messaging space, and communication space, and frankly, campaign political space, to be able to bring his thoughts into facilitating today's conversation. Bernie, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dave.
Fantastic. And like I said, today's session is the best ways to communicate your message with direct mail, and I'm going to hand control over to you.
Okay, I see it.
Yeah. And
And
take us away.
okay, that should be the opening slide, right?
Perfect.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Dave. We're going to talk about top 10 rules for direct mail. This would be applicable to both candidates and policy campaigns that might use direct mail. Before I became a policy director type, I was the president of a small political consulting firm called Strategic Campaign Initiatives, Inc., and our major business was direct mail. So we sent millions of pieces on behalf of hundreds of candidates and causes, nonprofits that wanted to communicate directly with voters. This is a part of our Voicing Our Values package of resources for you. Voicing Our Values is mostly about what to say, what is effective, and we'll get into that in direct mail, but we're also going to be talking about the mechanics of direct mail. Almost everything that we talk about in these webinars is on our website, publicleadershipinstitute.org. The messaging material is under Message Guide right there. And we have a lot of policy material under the Progressive Agenda, which covers policy for both states and localities across domestic issues. And we have a special project on abortion rights, which, if you're interested in the issue, you should go there, because there is no such thing anywhere else than our playbook for abortion rights, which you'll find right there on our website. I want to talk about three things. We're going to talk about the mechanics of direct mail, and then I'm going to stop and have you ask any questions you like. Then I'm going to talk about the message that you convey, and then I'll stop again, and then I'll talk about design of direct mail, and I'll stop a third time. So, you know, what I really want is as many questions as possible. Signal Dave when you want to ask a question, or type your question into the little box on the right side there, and Dave will ask it for you. And, you know, just do it anytime. Dave will break in if it's important, or he'll wait until I stop and we take questions that way. But either way, it's much more fun for me, and it's much more rewarding for you if you ask questions and, you know, make it useful to you. Now, almost all of this applies to both large and small campaigns. In large campaigns, direct mail is usually only a piece of the communications puzzle. And in those cases, it's usually focused on a particular demographic. So seniors or youth or people of color, and you're sending a particular message to a particular group. But in state and local campaigns, you're usually sending the same thing to everybody just because of the cost. Usually, you can't really segment your audience in direct mail because of the upfront costs of creating individual pieces. Now, let me start out by tipping my hat to somebody. There is a gentleman named Richard Schlockman, and in the 1970s and 80s, he created a new way for direct mail, which was known as the California style. He was in California. And that involved an innovative visual mix of graphics and emotions backed with very intensive demographic strategies. The idea of this mail was to imitate and even replace television ads, which at that time, and today I guess, were too expensive to run. in Los Angeles or San Francisco, you know, there were all these members of Congress who were running in the Los Angeles media market, and it was ridiculously expensive for them to buy TV. These pieces were designed to replace TV. They were like TV ads in the mailbox. And that's what we still do. We still use that, you know, that method that Rich created all those years ago. So I'm going to go through 10 rules just as a way to move us through. And the first rules are about mechanics. So the very first rule is, don't just talk about your mail plan, write it down. Write down everything about your mail plan. Matt Reese was the famous godfather of political consultants. He won the West Virginia primary for John F. Kennedy. There's a famous line by President Kennedy's father. He said, I'll give you the money to win, but I'll be damned if I'm going to pay for a landslide. Well, he was talking about Matt Reese and his work in West Virginia. Matt Reese said to me and everyone else that if a campaign plan is not written down, then it doesn't exist. So what you want to do is to write down the plan in detail, and I'll just sort of describe what we're talking about here. So you'd say piece number 1, and then you'd give it a title or subject like biography piece or environment piece or endorsements, and then you'd say that this is going to be a 8.5 by 11 postcard, or this is going to be an 11 by 17 folded in half. And then you say, who is it going to be mailed to? You know, like in a primary, you know, households with at least one Democrat who voted in one of the last 2 primaries, plus newly registered Democrats. Something like that. What is the piece of the voter list that you're pulling for this particular piece? And then you want to give the quantity. What would that mean? Let's say 22,000 pieces. And then a description. You know, the outside of the piece is a picture of this, and the inside of the piece has the following information. So that you've got it all written down, piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in order, and what, you know, what this plan is really going to be about. Write down your whole plan before you ever send the first one. It's a huge mistake to do it as you are mailing, because you're trying to tell a story from beginning to end. So you need to imagine the story at the beginning. The other thing that you want to do is to create a chart of costs. So before a campaign, what you want to do is you want to go to your printer, your mail house, find out postage costs, and you're going to create a chart that down the left side has different sizes of direct mail. So let's say 8.5 by 11 folded in half, 8.5 by 11 cardstock, a card, 11 by 17 folded in half, 11 by 17 folded in thirds, and so forth, whatever the different sizes you're interested in doing. But have that down the left side, across the top, different quantities. So depends on, you know, the size of your district and everything, but whatever the relevant quantities would be, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, and then fill in how much it would cost to print mail house and for the postage mail each of those sizes and quantities, because, you know, the bigger the piece of paper, generally speaking, the more it's going to cost. The larger quantity, the more it's going to cost. But of course, it's the startup costs in design that tend to, you know, make any direct mail piece expensive at the very beginning. So create that so that when you're going through your campaign, you can always look down and say, well, we could increase it from 15,000 to 20,000, but it would cost us blank. This piece would cost blank more if we did that. Or we could turn this, we had planned on this being an 8.5 by 11 folded in half, but because we have all this great information, we may want to increase it to 11 by 17 folded in half. How much is that going to cost you? So you want to have that chart at the very beginning. You'll look at it over and over and over again throughout the campaign. Now, I'm just going to kind of digress a little bit into general campaign management, because whenever you do direct mail, you're really managing a campaign, especially a local campaign, because so much of it is direct mail. Everyone has to understand this when you write your mail plan. An awful lot of campaigning is done a particular way because that's the way it was done the last time. And, ask people, why are you doing it that way? Why are you sending it to those people? Why are you sending that? Because that's what won the race the last time. To me, that's the definition of a political hack. Saying that we're going to do this because that's the way it was done in the past. You have to be able to give a sound reason, a strategic reason why we're going to do it this way in this campaign. So rethink every single decision to fit this campaign. Now, what that means is good campaign management means maximizing the quantity and the quality of communication with voters. And that's all a campaign is, really, the quantity and quality. I'm going to start with the quality. Okay, so there are three basic types of information for a campaign to communicate. Okay, one is name recognition, two is credibility, three is a compelling theme. And let me just talk about each one of those. So name recognition. The first goal of any campaign is to increase the candidate's name recognition. Because how can anyone plan to vote for your candidate if they don't know his or her name? Can't work. So how can a campaign link credibility or a theme to a candidate if people don't know his or her name? So you have to have name recognition. Generally, you have to buy name recognition. Voters will learn your candidate's name from paid advertising, mail, handouts, to some extent signs. That's why fundraising will be, your top priority at the beginning of your campaign, and pretty close to the end of your campaign. You have to buy that name recognition, and so you have to raise the money to get that name recognition. Many candidates win on name recognition alone. One candidate has a name that's known and the other candidate doesn't, and that's it. Very frequently, incumbents are reelected simply because they have an advantage in name recognition. The second is credibility. Name recognition isn't everything, right? For example, you may know some perennial candidate whose name recognition is very high but loses year after year because he fails to cross the threshold of credibility. I know several. You get credibility for a candidate when opinion leaders, quote, opinion leaders, unquote, say or imply that your candidate can or should win this race. And therefore, a vote cast for that candidate is not wasted. It's the credibility of the campaign that is key, so people pay attention. Opinion leaders are like newspapers, membership organizations that make endorsements, individuals who have their own credibility within the community, like office holders, organization presidents, neighborhood leaders, clergy people. Perhaps as many as 90% of all elections are decided on name recognition and credibility alone. And that's it. You know, somebody's got the name recognition and the credibility. The third piece is theme. Now, let me just clarify terminology before I talk about what you do with a theme. A campaign theme is 1 or 2 sentences explaining the basic reason why your candidate should be elected. You know, it should answer, 1, why is your candidate running? And 2, why is your candidate better than his opponent? And that's the purpose of the theme. It's 1 or 2, it's like an elevator statement that in 20 seconds you can explain why this candidate. Campaign messages are statements that your campaign uses to communicate to voters in order to prove the theme. Okay, so let's just say your campaign theme was, this is certainly not likely, abortion is the overriding issue of the moment and our candidate is pro-choice while the opponent is staunchly anti-abortion. That seems like an unlikely theme, but back in the 90s, I won 2 races. This is exactly what the theme was, and we won. So let's say it was this abortion thing. In that case, your messages might include, 1, your candidate led the fight for particular pro-choice legislation. 2, your candidate has a history of working for women's issues. 3, your candidate is endorsed by pro-choice groups. 4, your opponent is financed or supported by an anti-abortion lobby. Right? So those are messages, but the messages prove the theme. Whatever you decide is that thing that people will vote for your candidate for and that distinguishes your candidate from the other candidate. On the other hand, a campaign slogan, a slogan is a short phrase that's used in campaign literature which synthesizes the theme. So the theme is probably 2 or 3 sentences. The slogan is just a few words, right? So not every campaign needs a slogan, but it comes in handy. So for the hypothetical campaign I was just talking about, you could say something like, your choice for choice, right? It was just a few words to put across the theme without explaining it too much. So your theme should be 1, simple. 2, differentiate your candidate from the others. It's not that your candidate is great, it's your candidate is better. That's what people want to know. 3, it has to be believable. And 4, that thing that you're using to differentiate, it has to be important enough to the voters to motivate their vote. So you might very well have somebody who's better on something, but the voters don't care that much, and so it doesn't get you anywhere. It has to be an important enough thing that that it makes a difference. Okay, that was the quality of communication. Now I'm going to talk about maximizing the quantity of communication. The very easiest thing to do in any campaign, and I was a campaign manager for both state senate campaign and a congressional campaign, and assistant manager in another congressional, so I know this. The easiest thing to do in a campaign is to waste money or other resources. It's very easy to waste resources. So many campaigns feature giveaway items that have no strategic purpose. So many spend half of their money or more on overhead expenses like expensive storefront headquarters. And the reason why they waste money is because that's the way it's always been done. You know, if mail is your broadcast medium, you should be spending probably at least 2/3 of your campaign budget on that. You need to cut back everything else so that you can focus on the direct mail. Just looking at the slide in front of you where I have 3 check marks, I just want to go over that. In every campaign, you really have only 2 assets, money and time. That is what you are spending, money and time. The candidate's time is special. The candidate's time is limited. First of all, it's very valuable, and second, there's only one candidate. But you can increase the amount of money you have you can increase the amount of volunteer time you have. Those are the assets that you're building. And then, so your campaign management is raising or maximizing the amount of money in volunteer hours, and then spending money and time as efficiently as possible, as I was just trying to put across. So one part of the maximizing is the second rule, which is target your voters. Now, let's say you're running in a district with a population of 100,000 people. Let's say 70,000 of them are of voting age. Let's say 65,000 are eligible to vote or eligible to register. 50,000 are actually registered. 35,000 actually voted in the last general. And only 30,000 voted in your race, state legislature. About 20,000 are pretty clearly not persuadable in a general. So in a case like that, there's only a few thousand who are persuadable. You're in this district, you're running a partisan race in the general, in a district of 100,000 people. There's probably about 5,000 or 6,000 people who are persuadable. If you buy a billboard, it's going to be seen by all 100,000 plus people who are in the next district over. Same is true of radio, newspaper ads, etc. There's only a few narrow-cast media that are efficient to go after your targets. One is direct mail, 2 is walking door to door, 3 is phoning, and 4 is certain kinds of email and social media. And that's what you want to focus on if you're in that kind of race, because then you're not wasting your money. You are paying only to communicate to the people you're trying to communicate to, and you can try to narrow down to that 5,000 or 6,000 people who are really persuadable. How to target? Mostly by party and voter history, to some extent geography, and to some extent age, but mostly because that's what you've got off the voter file. There are voter files that have more information. In a large campaign, mail can be targeted to reach specific voters based on many different geodemographic factors. Messages can be tailored to fit that audience. In a small campaign, you're going to pretty much pick out who are your persuadable voters, and you're going to send pretty much the same mail to everybody. It is possible to create special pieces on your laser printer and so forth, but you're not going to do it too much. Rule number 3 is time the pieces to arrive when voters are listening. Efficient campaigning is not just a matter of how, it's also a matter of when. Selling a candidate is not like selling a consumer product, because there's no election day when you're buying toothpaste, right? In politics, there is what we kind of call the window of campaignability, when voters are receptive to messages from the candidates. Generally, voters don't pay attention at all until about 3 months before an election. I mean, when you're talking about a local campaign. And then most voters don't pay much attention until the last 3 weeks. So, especially people who are persuadable, especially people who are less political, you really can't persuade them until the last 3 or 4 weeks or so. So sending a whole lot of mail before people are paying attention isn't going to help you. Once you do start mailing, you really want repetition, and you want to send, if you can, you want to send at least 7 direct mail pieces to the same household. That is 7 different pieces that in different ways put across the same theme. They all look different, they all have different words and pictures, but they have the same theme, the same reason why your candidate and not the other candidate and you hammer that over and over and over again. If you can't afford 7 pieces, you have to have at least 3 pieces. If you can't afford 3 pieces, you probably can't do direct mail. Also, part of this package is the pieces that you're walking around with. You want to have preferably some kind of pre-walk card that your volunteers go to the doors before you get there with your picture, if you're the candidate, with your picture, so that when you get to the door, there's some chance that they'll recognize you. You want to have some kind of palm card or piece that you're handing people when you're talking to them. And ideally, you want to have some kind of post-walk mailing where, maybe it's a postcard, where you're thanking people for talking to you. This, that's a first-class plan. I'm going to give an example. October of 2014. I should get October 2016. But on this one, just look at the spacing here, where the yellow would represent when you're sending mail. So if you were sending 8 pieces and the election was on November 4th, you might go for something like this. The 4th, 8th, 13th, 16th, 21st, 24th, 29th, and 1st. You want to keep them separated, generally speaking, at least 3 days, generally speaking, because you're sending them bulk mail, and that means that the post office can hold on to them, and you really want to try to avoid 2 pieces arriving at a house on the same day, because that sort of blows your repetition. So you want to space them out about like that. And if you were in a very local race and you were only sending a few pieces, they would only be in the last 3 weeks. So let me open up the floor for questions about mechanics, and then I will go into the message.
And Bernie's given a great framework to start thinking about how do you organize ourselves to be able to get our message out via a direct mail medium. If people have any questions, if you raise your hand or type question in the question bar to react, give comments, clarifications, etc. Raise your hand if you have audio capabilities. Type your questions if you have individual. If you don't have audio capabilities, it's an easier way to ask your question. As we're waiting to see if there's any questions that are able to come through, Bernie, I want to underscore a point that you made about this question. We have one inquiry that says, so if you can only send 1 piece of mail, is it worth sending? And you pointed out if you can't do upwards of 3, it's not really worth your time. Can you elaborate? Why is that the case? Why do you have to hit that level of repetition to make it worthwhile?
Okay. Do you watch TV?
Right.
Yeah. When an advertiser buys ads, they're buying rating points that gives a certain number of average repetitions to the average viewer. So pretty much it's worthless to buy TV ads unless the average viewer is going to see it 7 times. Because it'll just go over their heads. Will forget about it. Repetition is necessary in order for people to pay attention to what you're saying. The first couple of times, you just can't count on them to have received any message whatsoever. The repetition is essential, and especially because this mail is designed like TV commercials, and so it has the same need for repetition.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I know for nearly 20 years, people say, well, direct mail is dead. everyone's going digital, everyone's going to TV, I mean, mobile phones and everything like that, yet it remains a very powerful medium to get the message out, and I think you outlined the reason why. It's affordable. It's affordable for particularly local campaigns. It is a very useful tool. I mean, the great thing about direct mail, you know when your message arrives. Like, it's a window of a day or two. You know that everyone who is on your list is getting your information at that time, and so you have considerable amount of control on the message that you're delivering, to whom you're delivering that message, and where it fits in the bigger space. And unlike a lot of things, and Bernie, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's somewhere like 95, 98% of people check their mail every single day. So, I mean, and that's different than listening to their voicemails, checking their email, and all these other types of things, or even watching television for that matter. It is a virtual guarantee that most of your target audience at least will touch your literature, and it's probably one of the contributing reasons why it remains a well-utilized tool to be able to communicate things.
Yeah, and I would point out that the people who vote in the highest degree, the highest percentage of vote, are older people, and they are more persuadable by mail than by some kind of electronic means.
Yes.
Sure, young people are, very connected by social media and the like, and by all means use it. But I think that if you check in your particular district, what is the average age, or what are the ages of the people who voted in the last election? It's older people are disproportionately the voters, and they are disproportionately affected by mail compared to other, the only other thing that's better is walking up to their door and talking to them.
Right. I don't have this question, but usually when having this conversation around direct mail, and you laid out like the 7 points, and I mean, I've worked with candidates, I've worked with groups of folks, and people's like, 7, my goodness, Dave, that's like, seems like massive overkill. I don't want to annoy people. I don't want to bother people. And I mean, my response is generally, listen, you're really not that important to them. And at the worst basis, I mean, you might have their attention from the mailbox to the garbage can. So I mean, you talked a little bit about repetition. Like, why that degree of 7 points? I mean, that is it's not a random number of contacts necessary to kind of cut through the clutter. I mean, if you're going to elaborate a little bit around that, I think it's put people to ease if they're not asking this question. I'm sure some are thinking it. Is it overkill? Am I going to turn people off if I'm trying to put messages in front of them at that level of frequency?
It's not overkill if you do twice that much. They're not gonna turn you off for having too much direct mail. They turn you off for having bad direct mail. They'll turn you off if they feel that it's too negative. They don't like too much negative. But good quality mail is entertaining, and I'll get into that when we talk about design. I would say that 7 is, for a rough campaign, where you've got a really good battle going on. 7's about what you need, but I've definitely seen some state Senate campaigns get up to, 12, 13, 14 pieces on both sides.
Right. Jim is posing the question about the adage that folks sort their mail over the trash, and you get literally just a few seconds to make your point. And I don't want to expose, or I know we're going to get to what do you contain in it. But in terms of the value, again, for direct mail, given that in some cases you have a very short period of time, still still a useful tool? Or
Yeah,
most yes or no?
I will explain this when we get to design, but I'll just give a thumbnail. You have to design direct mail in three ways so that people who are just going to kind of glance at it still get your theme. They still understand what you're saying before they throw it away. The second type of person gives it more time, but they don't read the text. They will read the headlines, they'll look at the pictures, they'll often look at the picture captions, but they don't read the text. You have to design it so that those people also get your message. And then you have to design it for the real policy nerds like all of us who read the whole thing. But you know, that's no more than 1/3 of the people you're mailing to are ever going to read that text. So the
Right.
design has to, you know, and it's usually through pictures and headlines, grab people in a way that they get your message, even if they're only looking at it for about 10 seconds. Also, you know, yeah, there are some people who kind of sort it over the trash can, but um, most people who are going to vote take voting somewhat seriously, and they give a reasonable amount of time to making that decision. So, so yes, you have to prepare for the people who won't read it, but I wouldn't say that there's a tremendous number who don't look at it at all.
And this gets a little bit, and you talked about this earlier, Bernie, about trying to identify your persuadable audience. I mean, spending your energy, and at the end of the day, that you've got a group of people who are probably with you from the start regardless. You got a group of people who are opposed to you regardless, and so you're spending your energy as much as possible to, at least through the persuasion period of the campaign, convincing them why you're the better choice, and or why your cause is the better choice. And maybe as you get closer to election, activating your base to get out to vote. It's a little bit of, I mean, there's some science, but some art to identifying who that universe is, and I agree with you. I think that those voters that really are looking for information to be able to help make that decision, often very late in the electoral process, I mean, are likely to spend some time at least doing more than tossing it out. They're looking for information, they're looking for a reason to make a decision one way or another. Genuinely are a persuadable voter. Honestly, I mean, I've got a lot of friends. I get a lot of mail from a lot of people. I usually get angry that I'm getting mail early in the cycle from folks that I don't understand why I'm on their list in terms of for persuasion mail. Um, but I don't spend a lot of time. I'm pretty much a locked-in voter one way or another, and you want to be spending our time designing pieces to be able to satisfy that persuasion argument of why you should be picked over somebody else. I got one more question. We're getting a lot of questions. I mean, I guess I'll pause here for a second. People are asking, like, will this information be available? Will the slides be available? Some people are joining us, and the answer is yes. I mean, these websites will be available via our website, and we definitely can email it out to all the participants. So you don't need to take notes and anything you've missed. We can definitely get back to it. One other question before we move on, and because I want to make sure that we get through all the points during the session. Could you restate again the priority of sequence from a voter contact point of view? Mail, door knocking, phone calls. Like, is there an order that should be happening? Should these all be happening at the same time? Kind of some of your general thoughts. Then I'll add my editorial.
Well, the door knocking by the candidate, there's no time that's too early. You can go door to door many months before a campaign, and if you're an incumbent, you can go door to door anytime at all, and people are happy to see you. People are usually, even though we in campaigns we knock on doors all the time, the average voter usually says, "Oh, no one's ever knocked on my door," or "It's very unusual that people knock on my door." They love it. They absolutely love it. That is the most effective communication you can have by the candidate. Volunteers, it's harder for them to put across what it is the candidate is doing. I mean, they are more carriers of literature, kind of postal carriers than they are messengers of your message. But they can work, but pretty much I would say not very well before 3 months before the before the election. Phoning, I think that you have a hard time doing persuasion calls before, for a November election before Labor Day. I think after Labor Day, you probably can make persuasion calls. People are not necessarily, love persuasion calls just because they get a lot of junk calls from companies, despite the do not call list. Direct mail is usually the most effective thing other than the candidate knocking on somebody's door. But, it's expensive and you have to get that repetition.
Right. And I mean, to add to the repetition, I mean, in the layering of all those pieces, a piece of direct mail has, been sent out, even volunteering, knocking doors, and I think Bernie used it kind of like postal carrier roles of distributing a palm card or whatever, creates the effect of reinforcing a message that they've received something already. So it still provides this value of building name recognition. There's a campaign happening. There's efforts to push things out. If you can get that person on the phone or a message and through that person, again, it just helps create that level of intensity to cut through the clutter. But I completely agree with Bernie that direct mail, what you know about direct mail is that when it lands, it's land uniformly based on whoever you decide to send it to, and that because you get to control that. And then what other voter contact activity that you engage in really help build on it. And so I really look at this a lot as like an all of the above strategy with intensity. The intensity, candidate walking obviously high on the list, direct mail next, and then as you follow through their phones, other canvassing, and other types of stuff, all help complement and reinforce these broader themes and messages that the campaign's trying to push. Why don't we stop there? I know there's a few other questions. I'll try to add them in the next segment, but I don't want us to lose. I want to make sure we get through all 10.
Yep. Okay. I'll move into the message. So, candidates and activists tend to think of local election campaigns as if they were small versions of a presidential campaign. And it's just not the case. It's like a local campaign is fundamentally about two things: name recognition and a general perception of which candidate is on my side. Name recognition, as I said, it's a matter of campaign mechanics and hard work, so I'm going to focus on how to persuade voters that you are on their side. First, understand this is not, it's usually not a matter of issues. We activists judge candidates by their laundry list of issues. Good for us. We understand issues. We know issues. We're looking for issues. The average voters simply don't. The average voters really know so very little. And when you walk door to door, you see, over and over again how very little they know. So issues are usually useful as illustrations of your campaign theme. Okay, so your campaign theme is the key, as I was saying. It's the narrative. It explains why voters should vote for you over your opponent. You want to frame the question that you want voters to answer as they vote. Let's say you were in a high crime area or there's a perception of high crime. Which candidate will protect me from crime? If that was your message, you're saying, I'm a police officer. I'm the one that can protect you from crime. Or, someone has a history of neighborhood activism and has won some battles. you frame the issue. Which candidate is going to stop the developers from ruining our neighborhood, or whatever. It's that theme that distinguishes you from the other candidate or candidates, and that's what you're trying to put across. I'm on your side because of that theme. Now, there are other ways of putting across that I'm on your side. Okay, one of them is, I'm one of you. So this is normal. I'm the same race, religion, ethnicity, geography. I'm the one from, in a big district, I'm the one from Rockville, and most of the voters are from Rockville, so I want to play that up. It's not unreasonable for voters to assume that someone that shares their demographic characteristics might understand their problems and deal with their problems. That kind of politics can get ugly, as we've seen on the national level, but it won't go away by pretending it doesn't exist. The second, this is an example. So, here's a piece of direct mail that is saying that it's talking about who the candidate is and getting people to identify with the candidate. This piece is a few decades old, but I would do the exact same piece except in color today, and it was ridiculously effective because it was extremely personal and made people feel like, this is like my neighbor, this is like my relative, this is like my family. The second way is to say, I'm ideologically one of you. This is what most of us think of when we think of campaigns. It's most practical in general elections because in primaries it's harder to put across the ideological difference. But whatever it is that you're trying to put across, you have to put across in a very practical and concise way. Voters aren't going to understand if you say your opponent voted to lower the upper tax bracket or some complicated description of specific policy. You have to make it pretty simple. I'm for the 99%, the other person is for the rich. Here's an example of I'm ideologically one of you. It's specifically on an issue. This is abortion, and this was spectacularly successful. It was where it was clearly one candidate who was pro-choice against one candidate who was anti-choice, and the pro-choice candidate won. The third way to be on your side is to say, I will get things done for you. So this is actually a theme that wins maybe most city or county elections. Our candidate is the candidate who is effective, experienced, gets results, is a leader. It's not ideological, it's that they're effective. So you say anybody could vote right, anybody can say that they're on the same side, but my candidate, has the skill and the experience to get results, and it's going to benefit you personally. So endorsements from individuals and groups can also be used to illustrate that somebody gets things done. Here's an example of a gets things done mail piece. Is just at that time the mayor of Annapolis, Maryland, and these are things that he accomplished. You see there's very little text here. It's just putting across he gets things done, and he did. The last of the four ways to say I'm one of you, I'm on your side, is to say I'm the candidate for change. Americans are kind of hardwired to dislike government. They're always ready to believe the worst about incumbents. So there are many, many opportunities to run a campaign that's focused on change. Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992 was about change. Barack Obama's election in 2008 was about change. Voters strongly believe the state or local government is on the wrong track. then this theme, just saying you're the candidate for change, might work for you. You know, here's a candidate where we made change, you know, his entire theme, and made the, you see the signs didn't say Kevin Chavis, which was his name. They said Chavis for Change. And this worked. It worked real well. So rule number 5, make a contrast between you and your opponents. Okay, as I said, you know, it's not good enough to say you're a good person. You need to say you're a better person. Here's an example where really there are 3 candidates who are going to vote the same way on everything, probably. So, and one of them distinguished himself that he didn't vote for a tax increase and the other 2 did. That's, you know, that's effective. Persuadable voters care about themselves. You really cannot expect them to vote because of some higher interest. They want to know what this candidate or cause is going to do for themselves, their families, their own communities, and your theme has to be about how you're going to help them personally. When you highlight issues, it should be to show that you will directly or indirectly improve their quality of life. You know, the parks will be cleaner, the traffic problems will improve, government offices will serve citizens better, unwanted real estate development will be thwarted, you know, as opposed to trying to say that you're for the common good. That's just not going to work. We ardent progressives, we are for the common good, absolutely. But that's not what average voters care about. Average voters want to know what policy is going to do to them. Okay, so let's stop for questions about message, and then when we finish these questions, we'll talk about design of direct mail.
We got, I know this falls a little bit in design. I think you referenced in one of the earlier pieces you talked about. And tell me if you're going to address this in the next session, next section. The black or white or color? That was one of the questions that came up.
Color. I show examples that use black and white pictures because at the time that those pieces were created, it was common and way cheaper, way cheaper. Now it's not way cheaper, and you're not going to look right unless it's color. It's just not going to look right unless you're actually showing black and white pictures, which I suggest you do sometimes in your bio piece. People like that.
For design aesthetics, and I think that's a good point for people to realize is that technology has made these almost all reputable printing outfits have digital press. The cost differential is not that significant. The factors that still play a role is volume and quantity. But that's regardless of the black or white or color components, and so it's a
right.
That makes
it used to be that printers, the most efficient thing to do was to use a press that applied 4 colors, and so it applied 2 colors to the front and 2 colors to the back immediately. Or they had a 2-color press and they did what was called work and turn, and that's why 2 color, black and a color, was efficient.
Work and turn.
That's what it used to be called when you would put it through once on one side of the paper, and it was designed so that you flip the paper over and run it through the exact same press, and it does the other side. So let's say you had the front and the back side by side being printed at the same time. You flip it over, the front and back is being printed on the back of that piece of paper, and then you cut it. That's a work and turn.
Right.
You don't need to know that.
Right. Not anymore. Right. I'm working with other mass media direct mail firms. An analogy that was given because of the technology that exists today, that it is that digital press offers a host of unique opportunities to personalize mail. And I think if you look at, if you're getting mail via the DCCC or other types of big outfits and everything, that the degree that the direction that they're moving to personalize the appeal is because the digital press, in relatively small volumes, is able to create and can actually digitally drop something on. I was just talking to a printer a couple months ago, and says, "Hey," he was telling me, "Dave, we can drop the actually household name into the lit piece, because it's on a digital press. The Woodward family will benefit from Boom, and they can do it for every household that they're mailing to as they're spitting it out of the machine." So it's the technology is really important, and I think this comes back to the logistics piece. And you mentioned laying out what's the framework, how many pieces are you doing, what's the timeline and everything, and then have a conversation with the mail house to work with them to figure out what's the cheapest way to drive down costs. We're getting a lot of questions that are starting to come up, like, well, how much does this cost, and what should I expect? What's a good rate for printing? Brittany, I'm going to throw it to you first, and then I can help them circle around. But some of this is based on what's the capacity, what's the equipment that the printer that you're working with has to help answer that question. But I don't know if you have some general ideas of like what's a really good rate on the printing side of things.
I can't answer. I really can't. There's so many factors.
There are a lot of factors, and I would answer this way, that if you're going to do the 3 pieces of mail, ideally, it would be you would probably be better. It would be to your cost advantage to get all those 3 together, particularly with a similar type of mail. If you're talking postcards, oversized postcards, etc., if you're involving a lot of folding or unique shapes and everything, it might be a little bit different. But if they're relatively similar pieces, to run them together, the cost per unit drops substantially, depending on, again, the biggest factor is how many pieces are you doing. Because as soon as you hit the printing press, there's a flat rate regardless if you're printing 1 piece or 10,000 pieces, 100,000 pieces. And the weight of paper, all those types of things certainly come into place. I generally, when I've worked with candidates and others, in issue campaigns and things, if you getting a large enough volume, large enough quantity, getting below 10 cents a piece is not impossible. And if you are consistently above that, opening up a conversation with a printer, like, how could I drive this cost down lower? Other creative ways to drive down cost is potentially looking to gang run your print job with another campaign or another print job that's happening that's a comparable type of pieces can drop down costs. I've seen pieces drop below 5 cents a piece, or $50 per 1,000 pieces, and that is, the cost savings there over the course of the entire campaign can be pretty substantial. We have a question from Kevin that asks about contrast advertising. By nature, does it lean towards negative advertising? I know we're going to get into the messaging piece next. Do you want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah, there's basically 3 kinds of mail. One is purely positive, one is comparative, and one is negative. So your purely positive is going to be usually maybe half of your mail or 1/3 of your mail. And your comparative, you want to make it seem like it's not all that negative. It's kind of matter of fact that, you know, our candidate's better because blank. The negative is when you're totally negative and it's really just a hit on the other person and you're not trying to bring up your own candidate at all. Ideally, there's not too much of that because unless you're really clever, people generally don't like it. It's effective, but you also irritate people.
Right. I mean, the thing with negative that you will lose people because you go that route. And I can speak for my very first campaign when I was running for office. My opponent beat the hell out of me, and whereas people had known him his entire life, who voted against their political persuasion because they thought it was like under the belt, unfair, and frankly it was through an independent expenditure campaign that didn't actually help him. So it's you lose some people if the attack is strong enough. You potentially move supporters of your opponent away from them, and so it's a gamble. On the persuasion point, if you provide, to me, there's like the fair comparison and the unfair comparison. And if, to Bernie's point, the presenting of a candidate around, are you on my side? And presenting things that are more aligned with us. I mean, us being whatever the audience that you've identified, and identifying actions by an opponent not with us is very fair game. I speak for my very first race for the county commission against a very popular incumbent. Taking the position of not funding a rape counseling center, basically, and argued they had to pick between auto theft investigations and rape investigations, and it was over. Like everyone points to, like, in late September, this race was over when he said that, and we made sure that every person heard that message 3 times. Fair game. There was zero negative impact on me because we were drawing something that they actually did. So I think it's for those who are always concerned about being negative, voters have to make decisions on contrast, and you have to help draw the comparison. And there are fair ways, real ways that relates to people. We got one other question here. If differentiation of an incumbent with another actually upsets a lot of persuasion voters, would you create different pieces for them? Like, my guess is, what they're asking, like, do you create a unique piece for a persuadable audience that, if you have multiple people in a field of races to draw that contrast, or do you kind of lop a bunch of people on the same group? And I think you lifted up a piece in which you had multiple people running, and you could draw the contrast between yourself and them if they were the same type of issues.
Yes, you really want to avoid, if it's a multi-candidate race, you really want to avoid, if you're A, attacking B and not attacking C. Because if A attacks B, usually it causes both of them to go down and C benefits. So when you have a multi-candidate race, you're less likely to go negative, and it only really works if you can lump everybody together, but it doesn't have to be negative. You're just trying to say that your candidate is the best on blank, and you may have to talk about the other candidates in order to explain why they're the best.
Right. Excellent. Okay, well, why don't we move into the next session so I make sure we can get through all the points before our time is up.
Great. Okay, rule number 6 is grab voters' attention. So unlike all of us, voters are normal people. I mean, we're not normal for having this conversation. They're not interested in unsolicited mail in general. They're not interested in political advertising in particular. So if your piece looks dull or boring or like any other political piece, they're going to be much less likely to be interested and look at it and give it the time you want. Mail's not a passive medium like television. You know, if voters don't get interested and involved in your mail, they won't get your message. So you want to grab their attention with non-political images, usually pictures or drawings, that speak from popular culture. That's one way to do it, but to grab their attention that's in a non-political way. So each piece should look different so that people think that it's a different piece, but you want to have the same logo, and you want to have the same theme. You're putting across the same idea. So, you know, here's an example of a very simple way of getting people's attention. Now, this is in Wisconsin, so it might not work quite the same if you were in New York City, but you see how non-political this is, and even a little goofy, but it gets people's attention. Or this, you know, this is just doesn't look like a piece of direct mail. It doesn't look like a piece of political mail. So people are going to be looking at it and say, huh, what is this all about? And they're more likely to read it and try to figure it out. This is the cover of a bio piece that we did years ago. And, you know, people were, this was in Washington, D.C., people were very, very interested in this piece because of this cover. I mean, they could identify with the piece and wanted to know more, and it's totally non-political. The same thing is true. I showed you the inside of this piece. This was the outside, just to get people to open it up. A similar piece that, you know, just to get people to open it up. It doesn't look at all political. And this is the inside of that piece. Just to, you know, in this case, people will look at the pictures and they will read the photo captions. Or this, you know, this is basically a negative piece attacking candidates for their votes on gun issues that they, you know, for the NRA, and this is a very dramatic way of getting their attention. They look further because it doesn't look anything like a political piece, at least on the cover, until they open it up and they get more of the, you know, what this is about. So, in other words, don't do this. You know, this is common kind of thing. Don't look political. Don't do this. You know, this, I see this all the time. There's too much stuff. It's clearly political. The bullets, lose the bullets. Don't ever use bullets. If you have check marks, don't ever have more than 3 check marks. It shouldn't look like this at all because it does not get anybody's attention. Here's another example. You know, just a typical thing. This is just, people would say, there's nothing wrong with this. This is like typical political mail. Yeah, this is typical political mail. You're really not going to get people's attention with this kind of thing. Rule number 7 is don't assume that the text will be read, and I already explained this to some extent. There's a rule of thumb. 1/3 of the recipients for direct mail will look at the photos, headlines, maybe the photo captions, and that's it. Another third will read maybe some of the text, and maybe the remaining third will read all or, you know, almost all of the text. Point is that you have to design it so that it gets a point across without reading much. You know, so this gets the whole thing across in very little time. People will look at the picture, they'll read the headline, they get it. On the other side, there's going to be a lot more text explaining it. But just the person who glances at it gets the point. Same thing is true of this. You know, it's getting the point across of this particular piece. This is the this is the inside of a bio piece. Most people will not read this whole thing. However, most people will look at the pictures. They like to look at pictures. And so you want to get interesting pictures. And then, photo captions, there's a pretty good chance that they'll read photo captions because they like looking at pictures. But then when you get down to the text, it's a minority of people that are going to actually read that text. You want to design it so that the pictures and the photo captions put across the message that you're trying to put across. Don't do this. This does not, you only get your message across. There's no message here, but if you had a message, the only way to get it would be to read the whole thing, and the minority of people are going to read the whole thing. Rule number 8 is use the credibility of third parties. So this is true of both, getting individuals and groups to endorse you. Politicians always make claims, but do the voters believe them? More and more frequently, the answer is no. People are very cynical. So that's why campaigns need third-party validation, especially if you're doing a negative thing. You really want it to come out of somebody else's mouth. Your mail should include statements from the press, public reports, credible interest groups, well-known individuals to reinforce your message, because they're more likely to believe somebody other than you. So here's a very good example. This is that's Chris Van Hollen, who is a member of Congress and just won the primary for U.S. Senate in Maryland. And he is endorsing someone running for state senator in his home county. And, this is a ridiculously straightforward way of saying that Chris endorses Cheryl, and then it also has his logos to show other groups endorsing her. I mean, just very simple, very straightforward, doesn't take any effort to get the message. Very effective. Here's a piece on environment where the Sierra Club endorsement is really the point of it. Who's going to read the text about what he did? A minority of people. But a majority of them will get the point that he was endorsed by the Sierra Club, and maybe the point at the bottom that he was endorsed by the Post. Rule number 9 is use comparative and sometimes negative mail. Now, people don't like negative. They don't. But it works. The trick here is don't be mean, okay? A third party who's attacking can be meaner, but you can't be. Let's see if we've got some examples here. Make your negative funny or clever. If ever you can, make it funny or clever. It takes the sting off. People focus on the funny or clever part of it, and they feel less negative toward the sender. So here's an example. I mean, this is just going way out of your way to soften up the negative where you'll see it's a very negative message. Here's another example where, it's a very negative message, the greedy bunch, very negative, but it's clever. So, this cleverness gets people to not reject it and to get the message through. Here's an example of, it's an attack on a candidate for overspending, and it's just using this picture to get people's attention and to make it a little funny. The same thing is true here, using an old picture just to get people to soften up when, it's a rather negative piece. This is an example of, it's a straightforward attack, and this was actually from a third party. This is not the candidate attacking his opponent. It's a third party endorsing the senator on the left and opposing the candidate on the right. see how the colors support the good and bad guy thing, so that the good guy has the bright colors and has black text on the light background, and the bad guy has less good picture with the white text reversed out of dark. You know, without reading any of the text, I think that you can get the point that one person is the good guy and the other person is the bad guy. And here's another example of, you know, don't do this. So this is what we used to call nuclear winter advertising, you know, which is just very very seriously negative. You know, that the tone of it's negative. You've seen many TV ads where the narrator is talking in a nuclear winter kind of voice. That's not so effective, especially in direct mail, more so on television. And rule number 10 is informally focus group your mail. Now, what you want to do is to create a mock-up of your mail, you know, just using Xerox and doing it on your, you know, gluing it together with some pictures and text and headlines and so forth. Or if you got, you know, a designer who can do this, have the designer design it and then bring that design to your kitchen cabinet. Friends, people who are, some people are political, but definitely get people who are non-political in the room and show it to them and say, you know, what do you think? This is really, really useful. You'd be surprised how much you'll learn from your friends and your non-political neighbors compared to, you know, your paid campaign manager or, you know, people who have been in politics for years and years. You will learn a lot by having an informal focus group, a kitchen cabinet. The final thing that people generally ask about direct mail is, should you hire a professional? Well, a professional designer, yes, you have to have someone who's a professional graphic designer, but that can be done fairly cheaply. There are some excellent direct mail firms. Should you hire them? If you can afford it, absolutely. They know exactly what they're doing. There's lots of people that have lots and lots of experience. I would say if you possibly can, you should hire them. But most political literature is called junk mail because it really is junk. You know, a campaign does not save money by producing stuff that nobody reads. So you either have to get a professional or you have to be very, very focused on making your mail excellent, because you don't want people, you don't want to wake up after the election's over and you just barely lost and say, you know, I wish I'd have hired somebody who could have made this mail better. So you got to focus on making it really, really the best it can be. And that's it for that. We just have about 5 or 6 minutes for more questions.
Right. Well, and one thing, Bernie, I'd just like to throw out there, and this comes back to the stuff in the very beginning about mapping everything out. The storyboard will help illustrate what the overall narrative that you're trying to sell. And that's so important. And if you're and these professional consultants, that's, I mean, you pay them the big bucks to help be as effective as possible of telling that story, and that's exactly what they'll do. But it comes with a price. I mean, to hire someone, I mean, the best firms out there. And if you're running in a relatively, I mean, a local race or a small issue campaign, it's cost prohibitive. That they spend most of their energy on congressional level races and up, if you want to think of it that way. And so, I mean, it's mapping out what you're going to do, what the storyboard is, planning all that out. It really saves yourself can potentially save yourself a lot of time and costs, and then you get someone who has the skills necessary to use the graphic design software, which is amply available, to put something out there that evokes these emotions. So put that out there.
Most professional firms, you cannot do negative mail better than they can. They are just terrific at negative mail.
Okay.
However, you generally can do better with your positive mail because they are a little too cookie cutter. I mean, in order to make money, you have to do a lot of campaigns. And positive mail, it's harder to do good positive mail than good negative mail. Good negative mail is having one really good idea with a really clever picture, which they do really, really well. But positive mail means, digging through hundreds or thousands of photographs and finding some that really are going to grab people's attention in a positive way. You're going to have to do that because they won't.
Right. Senator Kagan, who's joining us today, posed a question that I think is really, really useful. So happy to see her.
Wait a second. Cheryl, you should have been giving this. Nobody knows direct mail better than Senator Cheryl Kagan.
That's absolutely. She posed a great question. So direct mail, this old tool, this familiar tool of the political campaigns. How do you recommend using social media to complement your mail and to push your message out? So using the technology that's available to us to further carry the message and intent of the direct mail that you're sending out.
Dave, you can probably answer this better than I can. I'm just going to say that the key is to have a uniform theme between the two so that they reinforce each other. But Dave, you know more about.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think once sending it out, posting it. I used a validation piece, particularly if they're community leaders who are captured on literature, empowering them to push things out, to lift up stories, to maybe tell larger stories that you can't capture. You can only capture in a few words on the literature piece. But direct mail, social media creates an opportunity to integrate into your website, to comment and react. There's a lot of opportunities to engage your social network to those who are already plugged in, or push messages out via Twitter and a host of other social media tools that are available to us, and allow other people to lift it up and push it out. The targeting aspect, because you can't control exactly what the complete universe is, but your supporters are probably within your network. It's a really great opportunity to kind of tell a bigger story. What's useful about that is, and I'm glad the Senator raises this question, because the targeting aspect of campaigns across the political spectrum have gotten a lot better. And if you're a reliable voter for a particular party candidate or a reliable voter for a particular issue, you often get left out of that pool because there is a cost. You're talking printing, production, mail, postage, etc., upward of 40, maybe 50 cents a piece. And if I have some sense that you're already with me, I'm not going to spend my persuasion resources trying to convince you to be with me. And it's one way to be able to see what's out there. I've seen it done, and I think the same applies for if you do have the resources to go up on cable or lift up those similar themes with short videos and digital advertising, which is relatively cheap as well. Your assurance that those messages are going to reach the exact voter you want, you're just not going to get the same level of precision that you get with direct mail. Direct mail, address, mail lands, the mail lands. social media, impressions, and all this other type of stuff, it's a little bit different. But because it's fairly cheap, it's not a huge expense to lift it up. Lift it up further. So it's a way for kind of like older communication methods to really be linked in with social media. And I've seen it done incredibly effective, especially when the introduction of humor, especially if you're doing the contrast or the attack. There's a lot of creativity that can be lifted up to push through social media, and social media is a great medium to help carry that point and that drumbeat of the message you're trying to send. But it's a great point. We shouldn't lose sight that in all these types of voter contact, they should be layering each other. And I would say the same thing about a phone program, that if you're having supporters call prospective voters around a candidate or an issue, that when that piece of mail lands, whatever the message that's attempted to be delivered, whether through a paid phone program or a volunteer phone program, should reinforce that. And that, again, comes all the way back to having the plan, and when you're sending this stuff out, to be able to help inform all these other voter contact techniques and tactics that are available to us, because you want them to reinforce themselves. You want one to help remind the person of the other piece of information that they've received through possibly another medium. And repetition, repetition, repetition. And with that, I guess, I'm mindful of the time, Bernie. Any closing remarks on all of this as we kind of wrap up at the closing hour right now?
No, but I appreciate everyone's time, and again, we will have this on our website fairly soon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So anyone who missed some of the beginning portion, you'll be able to get that. And we want to thank everyone for taking the time. When we talk about the mechanics, some of the theory and strategy of using direct mail to get our messages out, to really carry the messages that we lift up in a lot of the other communication sessions. I hope you find value in this. Share examples and where you put this into action. I think that, again, that what's working, what's not working. Let's not let this be like the last point of revisiting this. Let this be an ongoing conversation to improve our effectiveness to achieve the goal of being most effective in moving folks in the direction that we want to move them. So, Bernie, thank you very much for everything, and thank you everyone else for joining.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.